So this is part two of the book group session at Nerd Camp. And I just, part one ended where you were looking at sort of the informal book group discussion. And I have that book group, sort of the card guide that I gave you during the session. I have that linked on Ethical ELA on our blog post. So one of the things that made that successful is that we scaffolded how the language and the sort of the focus and attention that we want to spend when we're reading books, and we're going to have to talk about them. So this allows students to read for pleasure, but also to read maybe just a little bit more sophisticated, or just to draw on the skills that they've learned in previous years to see how it applies to their independent reading. And what I mean by that is if you learn setting and character and direct characterization, all those kinds of things, but you don't really see how it impacts your personal reading lives, and we're kind of losing the purpose of why we're learning the author's craft and things like that. So when students are starting the school year, they read choice novels, and we develop sort of a personal reading form. I talked about this a little bit. So that looks like on Google Form, the students sort of create these different questions. They own this form. I kind of guide them through creating it, and then they share the link with me that I can check it every week, or whatever I want to. And I can see their preferences. So the student sort of by the end of the school year, so I think this is from August through January, you can see the different books that she had read and the different forms. And these are some of her responses as well. So what you can see in the responses is evidence of the things that we were doing in class. So the student sort of making a claim, using a quote, using MLA citation, and then sort of explaining the reasoning behind the quote. So the student does a really nice job of that. You can see this is by December, so that's why these look really great, because after a few months of doing this. And so, students are applying that to all their different reading, whether it's Goodbye Days or Red Queen. Goodbye Days was a book group, Red Queen was a choice novel. So during first quarter, I guided and modeled the responses all during class. So this is what the slide would look like. They'd come in, they'd sit down, they'd read. When they were done reading, this is the conversation that we had, really informal, like just whole class or partner. This is what they would use to sort of write into their reading responses. This is just talking about friendship in the book. This is talking about applying vocabulary. This is how I did vocabulary instruction. I would just kind of pull an ACT word and try to apply it, a word that would apply to every character or every book that students were reading, and have conversations about that. Conflict, of course, and the scene where characters interact. This gets students talking, thinking about, even as early as August, just how characters are interacting. I didn't have to do a big mini lesson. I didn't have to do a slideshow. We didn't have to do worksheets. We just did it. Every student used their own choice reading in order to have these conversations. The subject of the book and how the subject is sort of different than the theme. Of course, trying to work in the personal reactions. We had some research days where we were looking at the concepts in the book. We talked about the structure of the book, chapters, tense. We talked about the leads in the book, and we used this also related to our writing. So those are just some of the many different daily reading responses that we did in class discussions that were related to students' choices. So when they would get together just on Fridays for an informal weekly discussion, about 10 minutes, I would just put this slide up, and students would, write their own questions. And I would just leave this up if students needed a little bit of a guide on how to talk to each other, or the discussion sheet that I gave you in our session. We just used that, and just teaching students how to pose questions, respond to questions, ask follow-up questions. Every week we focused on something a little bit different. And these are some follow-up phrases that I tried to encourage students to use when they got together. I just left it up on the board and let the slide be projected so students could just kind of refer to it as they needed. And this was word piece is this sort of the acronym that we used during class as a way of assessing. So after the book groups, the informal book groups or formal, this is what we would use to self-assess and to reflect. So this is one thing that we used. Okay, so transitioning to shared text book groups. I'm going to actually start this on a new video.